The first time I hitchhiked of any distance was when I was in Navy ROTC.
That's my friend Mike Shay.
My wife, Chris, she used to hitchhike into town as a teenager.
If you went to elementary school in the 80s or any time after, you've been told countless times by teachers and police and strangers from your community that you should never get into a car with strangers.
There were lots of people that hitchhiked, and there were lots of people that would pick you up hitchhiking.
So what was going on, or not going on, in the early 1970s that made Mike and his friends think it was a good idea to hitchhike?
We were all inspired by Jack Kerouac, on the road. We were inspired by their free living, hippies and stuff. We were picked up hitchhiking by people and brought to their houses and spent the night.
If you're like me right now, you're expecting something terrible to happen, that someone is going to end up on a milk carton.
And this happened a couple times. Just great people. I had lots of good memories.
To be fair, Mike and a lot of hitchhikers had heard that there was an element of risk to what they were doing.
We heard horror stories, okay? People told stories about murder, getting beat up. Guys would load their stuff into a car, and before they could get in the front seat or whatever to sit down, the guy would take off with all their stuff, But they were stories.
The simple fact is that bad things have often happened to hitchhikers. Ted Bundy and Rodney Alcala, a.k.a. the dating game killer, both are believed to have murdered or attacked people they found hitchhiking, in addition to the other ways they found victims. To this day, a series of 7 Southern California killings is still called the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Murders. Those killings still remain unsolved, by the way. Although the writer David Sedaris is known more for telling funny stories, he did share a true story of when he was hitchhiking and a man pointed a gun at his face. Even after Sedaris jumped out of the man's truck, the driver even half-heartedly pursued him for a little bit. Another writer, Bill Evell, talked about how at 12 years old he was hitchhiking, but the people in the car wouldn't let him out and drove him to a cemetery. He chose to jump out of the moving vehicle and then had to run through the woods in the dark to get help. All of these stories came from the same decade when Mike was hitchhiking.
That was part of the, thrill of it, is that it could be dangerous.
What Mike says next is what really stuck in my mind when I interviewed him about hitchhiking.
We hitchhiked 10,000 miles that summer of 72. I learned a lot about what being an American is by hitchhiking around the country.
On this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day, the podcast in which we interview everyday people about things that don't normally happen every day, we find out how Mike's willingness to stick out his thumb and accept rides from strangers across 1970s America brought him a connection and closeness with people that, we might need now. Just to be clear, I do not condone or encourage hitchhiking, and after hearing what Mike has to say, you might not either. In many places it's also illegal. But since he already did it, I wanted to share what he learned.
I'm planning on going on a road trip this summer. And she said, well, where are you going? I said, well, Colorado and points west. And she said, I'll go.
Mike's 1972 road trip to points west started with his girlfriend and a Volkswagen microbus.
Kind of a tie-dyed look on the outside. You couldn't miss that there was a long hair at the wheel. Left Florida, camped out, got to Texas, and the engine blew. But we got our sleeping bags and our backpacks, and we just started hitchhiking. We were in Wichita, Kansas, and we stopped there in a park, and some long hairs in Wichita stopped, and we started partying, and we spent the night at their house, and they picked us up and took us to Colorado the next day because they were heading over to Utah. And we hitchhiked up the highway up, I-25 to Denver. Everybody was going to Aspen in those days. And we got to Yellowstone. We spent a couple days in Yellowstone. There was fun in the people that picked you up, traveling salesmen. I remember a guy who picked us up in his hearse, and we looked at each other like, uh-oh, what's this? He was a salesman of coffins. And he was taking one somewhere. This was in Montana, so I think he was going to Bozeman. He wasn't a guy that I was afraid of at all. He was just nice. He talked about his family, and
Could you see the coffin from where you were sitting?
Sometimes they have little windows you can look in, but I guess I didn't really want to look in to see if there was a coffin in there. He told us, but he said there's nobody in it. Once we left San Francisco and then Berkeley and got on the road, we hit some bad luck going into Reno. We were really wanting to ride, and this guy stopped. He didn't look too weird, but he was in his 40s or something. He stopped in Reno because he wanted to gamble. And so we were there. We were saying, how long is this guy going to gamble? Do you want to go outside and just start hitchhiking again? And we went up to him and said, no, I'm going to leave. I've lost all the money I need to lose right now. So we got back in the car. He had gotten a little drunk. And so we're going down the road, and I fell asleep. It was dark. It was night. I feel an elbow on me, and my girlfriend says, he's grabbing me. And I go, what? And she said, yeah, he's just grabbing onto my chest. So I said, what are you doing? And he said, what do you mean? I'm not doing anything. I'm just minding my own business. I said, you're not grabbing my girlfriend, are you? And he goes, oh, no, I wasn't doing that. I said, let us out now. He was a pretty big guy, but I don't think he wanted any trouble. So he let us out, and my girlfriend was a little stunned by the whole thing. He took off. We were east of Reno on a very secondary type road, and I couldn't tell you exactly where, but it was midnight. We were out in the middle of nowhere. The pickup truck came, and it was a bunch of teenagers from town, and we were standing there, and they pulled up to us. Hey, hippies, and they were giving us a hard time. I said, man, come on, just let's leave us alone. And then they threw a couple bottles at us, and so we backed away and got ready for, I don't know, fight. And then they said some things, and they went down the road, and then they turned around and came back, and they threw some more. I can't remember exactly what they threw at us. We dodged anything, and then they cursed us and then moved on. I said to my girlfriend, welcome to Nevada. I guess this is what we got. There at dawn, two guys picked us up in this big old Buick. And they were probably in their 30s, maybe 40s. They were drunk. There were liquor bottles, beer bottles all over the floor of the car. And we looked at each other and said, okay, well, this isn't a real main road. Maybe they could at least get us to the highway. And we can, tell them we're going to get another ride or something. So, of course, they were so drunk that they were weaving all over the road. And then a highway patrolman pulled us over, and he didn't even have to give these guys a drunk test because they were so loaded. And he said, okay, who in this car has not been drinking? My girlfriend and I both raised our hands. The highway patrolman said, one of you guys has to get behind the wheel of this car and drive off because these guys are not driving. So we drive, and the guys, the whole time, they had more booze in the truck. So they brought more, and they were drinking. And then we came to an exit, and it was close to where the interstate exit was. So they decided they were going to get out and put some bottles out. And I thought they were going to do target practice. I was afraid they were going to take guns out, but they didn't. They just started throwing bottles at bottles just for practice. And Sharon and I looked at each other and said, we're going. You guys, good luck driving, because we're going to go over the interstate. We're going to head out. And they just said, okay, have fun. And we were on the interstate most of the day. And we were on the salt flats. You know how hot it gets out there. And I'm a freckle-faced guy. I get burned easily. And people were passing us. We always had signs. So I think we had a sign that said Denver. So I abandoned that sign. We also had a magic marker with us, so I made a sign, water, because we had no water. We were parched, and I don't know. I mean, we were feeling the heat. It was over 100 at least by that time. Finally, some young people in a flatbed truck pulled off and said, "You guys look like you need a ride." We go, yeah, we need a ride. And do you guys have any water? He said, no, no water. I said, but we'll stop and get you guys some water. And it turns out that they were a group of Mormons, LDS members. They were just the nicest kids. They were just so nice. They pulled off at the earliest place they could, slaked our thirst. And these guys took us into town, and they said, you guys like McDonald's? We go, yeah, we're hungry. Yes, we're very hungry. So we're going to take you to McDonald's. They took us to McDonald's, and we were going to pay for it, but they paid for it. They just brought us to the highway, dropped us off. It was almost dark. We ended up hitchhiking with another young woman about our age, maybe a couple years older, maybe. She was on the side of the road. She wasn't hitchhiking. And then she came up to us and said, guys, can I please hitchhike with you? And I said, fine. That's three. This might be a little hard to get a ride, but you can hitch. She looked kind of desperate. And she told us a horror story. She had been hitchhiking by herself in Nevada and was picked up by a guy in a pickup truck. The guy turned off the main road, and he started going down a side road. And she thought the worst, was going to happen. And they went down the roadways, and she eventually pleaded with him, don't hurt me. And the guy stopped, and I don't know if he had a gun or not. I can't remember if that was part of the story, but stopped and looked like he was going to commit something. But then she started crying, and he changed his mind. And he took her back to the highway and then just left. So she had been traumatized already. And so we thought, okay, we'll hitchhike with you, and I'll be there to protect you. Oh, it got dark, and it got to be midnight or something like that. And a semi driver pulled over with the full truck, said, hey, I'm going through to Omaha, I think he said. And said, oh, we're going to I-25. Said, okay, I'll drop you off there. He was high. I bet he had about a ton of amphetamine in him or whatever. Because he was a chatty Cathy. Said, you guys, I have a sleeper in the back. And it's okay if you guys get back there and catch some Z's, but one of you girls have to sit up front with me and keep me awake. And so this poor traumatized girl, young woman, she was like, what does he mean by that? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll stay awake here and I'll be tuned into things, and you can go back and sleep and everything will be fine.
Mike's girlfriend took the first shift up front with the trucker.
Right around that time when everybody was doing the CB radio lingo and stuff, the guy was having my girlfriend talk to all the other truckers on the road and just having a great old time. The other young woman, she was a little tentative, but she got up front and she had a good time and just jabbered away. Now we're in Cheyenne. We got there. The young woman decided to go on with the truck driver because she was going to somewhere in Illinois. And so we went and we got to Denver sometime during the day, stayed with family, and just crapped out for most of the rest of the day.
I think one of the reasons why people don't hitchhike as much is because they have a greater awareness now of some of the bad things that have happened to hitchhikers. But I suppose you could even argue that in the late 60s and early 70s, as people were becoming more aware of a lot of the awful things that were happening across the country and across the world, people started to lose a sense of trust.
Manson had happened. Big riots had happened, demonstrations, all this stuff, some bad vibes. And so people took sides. You're bad. No, you're bad. no, you're bad. You're worse. And after I did a hitchhiking trip, I had to rethink. We had a young family picked us up and took us to Yellowstone. Okay, they cooked dinner for us, and they were about as middle American as you could be, and we just had the greatest time. And we had nothing in common with them, but I found that I was meeting and talking to a lot of people that I didn't necessarily have anything in common with, and they would talk to you and you would talk to them, and they were about as nice as could be. And that's really what it's all about. I'm a liberal. I live in a neighborhood full of conservatives. When I go out the door, I'm just a guy who has an electric scooter cooling down the street at 5 miles an hour, and people come out and talk to me, and I go and talk to them. That's it. Right? We need to talk. I don't want to stigmatize or categorize my neighbors in some way that'll make me feel less of humanity or something. I don't know. It's up to them what they do with me, but I don't want to categorize them. I am tired of this crazy struggle.
I really want to thank Mike Shay for sharing his story. Mike, I also want to thank you for helping me with writing. I've included a bunch of links in the description for the show. You can check out Mike's blogs and some of his other work in those links. You can also listen to David Sedaris' story about hitchhiking, as well as the other one I mentioned about the 12-year-old boy who was hitchhiking and got taken to a cemetery. I want to give a shout out to KHOL for playing this episode. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do a search for That Doesn't Happen Every Day. Every day is 2 words in this case, podcast, and you can listen to every past episode I've ever done for free. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to have a new episode to you in about 2 weeks.